fellow treasure hunters and explorers. I've had the stomach bug here the last few days, so I've put out a few more videos than I usually do for the week. Anyway, today I'm going to read a different treasure story. Recently, well, the past few years, I've been collecting old treasure magazines and old articles. Not only are they food for research, but they're very interesting and entertaining to read, and you get a perspective from an earlier point in history, and it gives you an idea of what people were thinking about and what they were doing besides treasure hunting and everything else that was going on. Anyway, today's article is from a Gail Rhoades publication originally appeared in Western Treasures in October of 1967. The Ute Indians retain a story among themselves that long ago the Quats, the Mexicans or Spaniards, came to the Uinta Basin area of Utah wearing iron shirts, and that these men, mounted on magnificent steeds, forced the Indians to labor for them in gold and silver mines. But to date, very few Spanish mines have been discovered in the Uinta Basin, and those few mines which have been discovered in Utah are far to the south. Yet I intend to prove the veracity of the words of the Utes shortly, hereafter, when I present some startling evidence on just 3 of these fabulously rich Spanish mines which still lie hidden in the Uinta Mountains. Most historians today are in agreement that the first Spaniards to enter the Uinta Basin arrived in 1776 with Father Escalante. However, Father Ortiz, a Spanish padre, told members of the American Army at Santa Fe in 1848 that the Spaniards had been as far as 500 miles up the Buena Verte River, that they had built a series of forts to trade with the Indians of that region, and that in 1650 the Indians rebelled and burned the forts, and killed or drove every Spaniard from the region. The Spaniards, always anxious for gold and silver for the treasuries of Spain, had forced these Indians to work in various mines in and around the basin, as well as in other parts of Utah and the southwest. This was the primary reason for the rebellion of the natives. However, the Spaniards did not stay away forever, and about 130 years later, before the white men started to penetrate the vast wilderness of the rugged Uinta Mountains, the Spaniards returned to relocate their old mines and to establish a trade route between Taos and Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Spaniards returned to relocate their old mines and to establish a trade route between Taos and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the Great Basin Territory, and between California and this same territory, which followed along the old Spanish trail of Father Escalante and along many connecting trails. For generations, great herds of horses, mules, and cattle were driven along these old trails by the Spaniards, Mexicans, and later Indians from the large ranches of California, where stock had either been bought or stolen. This traffic in stolen livestock continued along the old Spanish trail into the Rocky Mountains and beyond for many years, and it eventually became more commonly known as the Horse Thief Trail. Besides the immense trade in horses, mules, and cattle along these old trails, there have also been important traffic in Indian slaves and in Spanish mining operations. The slaves were purchased or stolen from the Spaniards and the Mexicans, from the Utes, Goshutes, and other tribes. And the majority of the miserable poor Indians were taken to Mexico, where the practice of slavery has been practiced from the most ancient times, when the Indian tribes of Mexico offered the enslaved warriors to their Indian gods as human sacrifices. Only a few of the Indians were forced to work in Spanish mines, but even so, these numbered in the hundreds. Many a trapper working out of Fort Bridger in the 1840s reported seeing hundreds of enslaved Indians with bare and tender feet in caravans as they traveled along the old Spanish trail, guarded by many mounted Spaniards on their way to uncertain destinations hundreds of miles away. Later, many of Utah's early Mormon pioneers reported seeing groups of Spaniards pass by their settlement, leading their burro trains to and from the mountains. The Mormons supposed the Spaniards were mining, but in those days they had their hands full to protect their homes and families, and they quietly let the Spaniards go about their business. Yet the settlers often heard of fierce encounters between the Ute Indians and the Spaniards, and on many occasions, old Chief Kanosh told the settlers around Fillmore, Utah, that his best warriors were often killed by the Spaniards when they went into the mountains for gold and silver. However, as the country became more thickly settled with the Mormon pioneers, and after many Indian rebellions, the Spaniards, which were not massacred, ceased coming. Parts of the old Spanish Trail continued in use as late as the turn of the century, because much of the trail allowed easy access through many vast wilderness areas of barren and almost inaccessible mountain ranges. It was during this period of our Western history that there appeared many colorful stories and legends of lost mines which were scattered along the old trail and throughout its adjacent territory, most of all which were once worked for the Spaniards by the enslaved Indians. Two of these, the Spaniards' Lost Cabin Mine and the Lost Rhoads Mine, have been discussed for years by prospectors, miners, and nearly half the residents of Utah, not to mention thousands of treasure seekers from other states. But the fact still remains that very few of these old Spanish mines have ever been discovered in the Uinta Basin, and this can only be credited to the great lack of information that is needed to locate these mines. I feel that I am justified because of my research and my own experience in the mountains in writing the story of the lost Spanish gold of the Uintas. Well, this article was from 1967, and I can attest that since that time, many of those lost Spanish gold mines have been discovered. Some of them are being worked by miners today. They're getting a little bit of color out, and some of them are not able to be opened because of their location, whether they're in the wilderness exclusive area that doesn't allow mining or down on native lands. Sometimes during the 1870s, 3 groups of Spaniards were busy mining 3 separate mines in the Uinta Mountains, all of which were only several miles apart, and equally as valuable in rich gold ore. Among these hardened Spaniards was an older man and his nephew who were serving as camp cooks. It is said that the old man and his nephew had been sent out on one of these mining camps by the other Spaniards to fetch some camp meat for the hungry miners. The man and the boy were gone most of the day, and when they returned it was near dusk. They had shot a huge buck deer and were near exhaustion by the time they had dragged the deer to a spot not too far from camp. So the boy's uncle ordered the boy to climb a nearby knoll and try to acquire help of one or more of the miners from the far side of the knoll. Shortly thereafter, the boy returned to his uncle out of breath, near hysteria, and without help. With much difficulty, he choked out a tragic story to his puzzled uncle. Leaving their camp meat behind, both the boy and the old man rushed back to the top of the knoll where they could look down on their camp. Once there, they were terrified by what they saw before them. Their comrades who had remained behind at camp were being brutally massacred by the rebellious Ute Indians and did not, as they could see, stand a chance of surviving the onslaught. Immediately the boy's uncle, understanding just how grave the situation was, grabbed the boy and ran away from the gruesome slaughter, thereby escaping the terrible fate which their friends and co-workers had met. They ran until they were completely exhausted, and then they only rested for a short time before they continued their tortured journey. Again and again they repeatedly tired out, but they knew the Indians would soon realize that they were not among the slain Spaniards, and they would be searching for them, so they kept moving. At an unknown location on the lower part of Rock Creek Canyon, the old man and his nephew were able to steal and mount 2 horses which were very helpful in their flight through southern Utah, New Mexico, and into Mexico. In Mexico, they later found out they were the sole survivors of that desperate massacre by the Indians. Many years passed, during which time the boy's uncle passed away from old age, and the boy himself grew old and weary. Then sometime in the early 1940s, the nephew returned to the Uinta Basin, a tired old man with a rapidly failing memory, a crude map of the mine locations, and a strong determination to find the mines which he had once helped work. After some effort, the old Spaniard managed to locate an old farmer who had a general knowledge of the area and knew his rocks and minerals. The Spaniard told the farmer that he could have the 3 gold mines if they found them, that all he wanted out of the deal was the 500 pounds of gold bars which were buried near the cabin not far from the upper mine. With only 4 days left to search, they set out to locate the knoll and then the mines. But the old Spaniards soon realized that one part of the mountains looked pretty much like the other, and try as they may, they failed to locate that huge knoll, the buried cache of gold bars, the old cabin near the upper mine, or any of the 3 gold mines. So it was with great disappointment that the old Spaniard was forced to return to Mexico, where he eventually died. The old farmer, however, continued the search until harvest time, when he was forced to return to his crops. And although the farmer spent many a summer in the area during the years that followed, he never found the mine or the gold cache. He never found the mines or the gold cache. In speaking of the Spanish massacre, the Ute Indians say that during the battle between the Spaniards and themselves, all of the Spaniards were killed, but that it was no easy task, and many of their Indian braves were also killed. The squaws of the dead braves did much mourning and grieving, and in their anger they mutilated the bodies of the dead Spaniards and cast all the gold which had been sacked and prepared for the smelter into a nearby lake. With this in mind, I have often wondered just how many outdoorsmen have actually fished from the banks of this particular lake, none the wiser that several feet in front of them was a fortune in raw gold, or that only a short distance away was one of the Spaniards' rich gold mines. Neither the Spanish or Indian stories have given us to go by as far as clues, information, or locations of these mines, but they do give us a partial history of the Lost Cabin mine, which is, in my opinion, is equally important. However, for many years my family has had some very startling information about the mines which they would never discuss with any outsider, and this is the information which I pass on to the public for the very first time. I firmly believe that it will eventually lead someone to the valuable gold mines of the Spaniards. It is certainly no secret that many a prospector has mistakenly searched the Rock Creek Canyon for the lost Rhoads Mine, as there seemed to be some evidence that Thomas and Caleb Rhoades had carried gold out of the area. And inasmuch as Thomas Rhoades, my great-great-grandfather, and his son, Caleb Baldwin Rhoades, my great-great-uncle, supposedly took gold from these Spanish mines, I must set the record straight. Sometime during the late 1850s, a group of about 9 Spaniards led a large burro train out of the mountains and into Utah Valley, where they stopped and set up camp to rest their tired animals. They maintained an armed guard around their camp and would allow no one near. Several days later, they loaded their burros and headed south toward Mexico. When they reached Chicken Creek, a large band of Ute Indians who had been sent from the reservation by their chief to retrieve the stolen gold set upon the Spaniards, killed and mutilated the dead bodies beyond all recognition, and then took their heavily laden burros back to the spot where the Spaniards had originally gotten the gold. Thomas Rhoads was among the group of men who made the gruesome discovery of the mutilated Spaniards on the dusty banks of Chicken Creek, and it's reported that one of the men picked up a small metal box or case, inside of which was a very old map. Thomas Rhoads, ever interested and involved in mines and gold, is reported to have taken the map. There are no reports among my records that Thomas Rhoads ever visited these Spanish mines. Although it is reported that when he translated the Spanish writing on the old map to English, he found out the map showed the exact location of 3 very rich gold mines. The fact that he was already committed in gold mining operations somewhere northwest of Vernal, Utah, the Lost Rhoads Mines from which he mined gold for Brigham Young and the Mormon Church, could explain why he never found enough time to investigate the 3 Spanish mines. Yet on the other hand, I have much evidence that Caleb Rhoades, Thomas's son, did find the mines and that he mined them from time to time. So to clarify this, Thomas Rhoades was the man who Brigham Young made the deal with Chief Wakara to get gold from the Indian lands to use for state currency and in the building of the Salt Lake Temple. And Thomas Rhoades, after Thomas Rhoades died, the Indians allowed his son, Caleb Rhoades, to continue to get gold from the mines. And it wasn't until the next chief, after Chief Wakara passed away, who stopped this practice of the Mormon pioneers being able to obtain gold from these mines. Caleb, like his father, was an expert outdoorsman and prominent pioneer of Utah. In fact, they passed through the Great Salt Lake Valley area, leading about 200 Mormons to California one year before Brigham Young settled in the Salt Lake City in 1847. Both Thomas and Caleb were considered blood brothers by the Ute Indians, and both could speak the Ute language fluently. Perhaps even more astonishing was the fact that Thomas and Caleb were allowed by the Indians to enter the reservation with Indian guides who were to protect their lives if need be, so they could work the sacred gold mines of the Utes for Brigham Young and the Mormon Church. The Utes called their sacred mine Keri Shinob, which means there the Great Spirit, or there dwells the Great Spirit. In reality, these mines soon became known as the Lost Rhoads Mines. It is important here to point out that these sacred mines should not in any way be mistaken for the 3 lost Spanish mines. In retrospect, the following things should be made clear to the reader. The gold that went into various Mormon temples and the gold plate upon the statue of the angel Moroni, which stands on top of the Salt Lake Temple, came from the Lost Rhoads Mine, and none of it at any time came from the Spaniards' lost cabin mines. Caleb Rhoades worked the 3 Spanish mines separately and apart from his church mission for his own benefit, as he never had to sign any agreement with Brigham Young, nor did he take any oaths while in the presence of Brigham Young and Indian Chief Aropine, as such was the case with the Rhoads Mines. And because of this, much more can be learned about the Spanish mines. So, Aropine was the chief that came into power after Chief Wakara passed away. About 10 years before Thomas Rhoads died, and shortly after the old Spanish map was translated into English by Thomas, Caleb took the map and went into the Uintas to search for the mines. It is not known how long he was forced to search the mountains for these mines, but according to a mining deed between Caleb Rhoades and John T. Clark, which was filed in 1903 at Heber City, Utah, Caleb located at least 2 of the mines on or about the 10th day of July, 1859. And according to a deed he had, a pine tree was also drawn on the old map next to an X, which represented the shaft. The deed was drawn up by Caleb Rhoades and his wife Shidsi for the purpose of giving John T. Clark an undivided 1/2 interest in the mines. But to this day it is not known what purpose Clark was to play in the development of the mines. The deed stated that the mines contained valuable metals of gold, silver, lead, and copper. In fact, if the figures given me are correct, then Thomas and Caleb cashed in at the Salt Lake County Assay Office a total of 1,514 pounds of gold during the years of 1855 to 1899. Just how much of this gold came from the Rhoads Mines or how much of it came from the Spanish mines remains a mystery, but we may safely assume that the gold came from both locations. During the early spring of 1903, Caleb went so far as to write the United States Congress a letter in which he told them he would gladly pay off the national debt if they would remove the designated sections of land from the UN Indian Reservation so that he could work the mines openly and without Indian interference. He even set along a large-sized chunk of the rich yellow ore with which to help persuade Congress that he was not joking. However, an outside group got hold of the letter and the gold, and almost immediately they formed the Florence Raving Mining Company and illegally entered the reservation to locate Rhoads Mines. Yet at the same time, Congress was busy putting forth a bill which would allow Rhoads and men like him to enter the reservations to mine and to homestead the lands. A bill which later became the law of the Uinta Reservation on September 1st, 1905. Unfortunately, Caleb died on June 2nd, 1905, just 3 months before the reservation was thrown open to the white men, taking a large majority of the secrets of the lost Cabin Mines with him and all the secrets of the lost Rhoads Mines. The Florence Raving Mining Company never did find the old Spanish mines, but they did locate and claim most of the gilsonite in this particular area. Shortly before Caleb's death, he was asked if he was not afraid that the company might find the mines, and he replied, "No, they'll never find them because they are in an area where they least expect them to be." Among the Rhoads genealogical papers, which I have in my possession, are a dozen deeds which all pertain to the lost Spanish mines, autobiographies, and 3 maps pertaining to the location of the Spanish mines. The first map is an exact copy of the original Spanish map found by Thomas Rhoads at the site of the Spanish massacre on Chicken Creek in the late 1850s, which shows the location of the 3 Cabin Mines, the mountain range, the old Spanish trail to the mines, and several lakes and creek drainages, as well as a drawn picture of the pine tree which stood by one of the shafts. The second map was drawn by Caleb shortly before his death. This map is a very crude map, and it's somewhat of a takeoff from the original Spanish map. This map I have published with the story so that the readers may take a look at it, but at this time I would not care to reveal the Spanish map to the readers, perhaps at a later date. Now the third map I have in my possession is somewhat similar to the one drawn by Caleb Rhoads, inasmuch as it is a crude copy from his map. This map was copied from Caleb's old map in 1958 by Mr. Ben Bullock of the Bullock Mining Company, and it has since been published in the Daily Record of Salt Lake City, Utah, June 23, 1958. The Uinta Basin Standard of Roosevelt, Utah, July 10, 1958, and the January issue of Western Treasures, 1967. It is not known if Bullock had copied the map exactly as it was.